In today's caliber comparison video, we are going to be pitting the newcomer, the 6.5 Creedmoor, versus the standard, the 308 Winchester. This is all part of a multi-part series where we are building a Savage 12FV, which is a very nice little target varmint rifle. We're turning this into a long-range precision rifle that we're going to test in a variety of scenarios, maybe do some hunting with it, and then the culmination of the whole project is going to be shooting the rifle at a big steel gong out at a mile to see if we can consistently get on target. I think this rifle is going to be up to the task. I had a couple of different calibers to choose from, and in the end, it came down to these two right here, 6.5 Creedmoor or 308. Many of you already know that I chose 6.5 Creedmoor, and we're going to discuss some of the differences between the two. It may not be as clear-cut an issue as some articles or other videos that I've seen out there make it. This is actually a pretty complicated one, and it's one where you may want to weigh in with your own shooting style, your own purposes, to pick which of these cartridges that you're going to use for your next build. I'm Kyle Broderick, the Social Regressive. Make sure that you hit the subscription button, hit the notification bell, and share this video because I think this is going to have a little bit of different information than you might have seen some other places. I'm going to try to hit all of the various reasons why you might pick one cartridge over the other. I might miss a couple of things and you guys can chime in the comments. But yeah, we're going to try to hit some things that maybe you haven't heard before. Thank you to patrons of the Destructive Arts for keeping these videos coming, and especially thank you to Peter and Sportsman's Guide at the 300 Win Mag and 338 Lapua Mag level. If anybody else wants to chip in $1 or $2 a month to keep these videos coming, yeah, please do. It's nice to keep the lights on around here and be able to go out and test some of these things, get some different equipment like you can see right here. And make sure that you subscribe because of this whole build series. This is going to be very interesting. I'm really curious to see where this is going to go, and I have high hopes for it. Before we dive into my notes and make a big comparison between these two cartridges, I have to point out that both of them are actually pretty rubbish at what we're about to do. Both of these can connect out at a mile, but they're really not designed for that. We're going to be going out on a relatively windless day if I can help it, and it's still going to be kind of a Hail Mary with each shot. The last time we went out with 6.5 Creedmoor at a mile, we were subsonic for over 400 yards. That's a testament to the stability of the bullet and its ability to get through the transonic barrier and still make hits out at that distance, but that's really not optimal. I want something that's still going to be supersonic at least, and I want something that's going to be able to deliver real energy on the target if I'm going to be serious about building a 1 mile rifle. So for that, I would even pass up 300 Win Mag. That's going to be okay, but really its bullets are not all that efficient. I'm going to go straight for 7mm mag, 28 Nosler, something that's more in the 7mm range with a big powder charge behind it. Those slick, heavy bullets are going to tear right through, and they should actually still be supersonic at a mile distance if you set it up correctly. And then of course you have the big guys like 338 Lapua Magnum or one of the Chi-Tacs or something, and then a mile is, that's kind of cute. But yeah, these two right here, we are building this rifle out in these, partly because that's what the rifle comes chambered in, but also because it's just kind of a fun challenge. The battle between 308 Winchester and 6.5 Creedmoor is hotly contested, and there's a lot of butthurt from combatants on both sides of this issue. I own rifles in both chamberings, I like both cartridges, and I think I can take a dispassionate view of this and show the relative merits of each of these cartridges. The first thing that we need to do before we really jump into this is throw out the notion that trajectory is everything. You're going to see in everybody's videos where they're talking about 6.5 Creedmoor versus 308, and I'm going to include this myself, you're going to see how the trajectory of 6.5 Creedmoor in general is going to be superior to 308. But there are lots of other things that we need to take a look at. When I'm comparing two cartridges or evaluating one for use in a new rifle, I'm going to take a look at its history, because its history is going to set limitations that are going to be baked into that cartridge basically for the rest of its existence. And we're going to see how the limitations baked into 308 actually limited everything else in the short action category right up till now. 308 Winchester was an attempt to take 30-06 performance and then squish it down into a short action cartridge, and it worked out really well. This had originally basically the same trajectory and performance as 30-06, and it was much more portable, as you can see. It's a nice shorter cartridge. and it's going to be easier to extract in semi-autos. This took the world by storm. Civilians snapped it up, military snapped it up. This is probably the most developed cartridge of all time. We're going to take a look at that here in a second. 6.5 Creedmoor, by contrast, was developed for civilian use, really. It was for target use, basically. Hornady developed this to work within the limitations that were originally set by .308 Winchester, where magazines were set to a certain distance. And one of the issues that you run into there is that you just can't really get some of these really long, slick bullets that are going to be much more efficient out at longer ranges. So what Hornady did is they worked around the limitations of the magazine and worked around a very slick bullet. They started with a 129 grain bullet, and they figured out how they could make a round that would cycle very well in semi-autos and fit into existing magazines like AR-10 magazines and work in AR-10 actions. Starting from these initial formulas, both of these cartridges have been rapidly and extensively developed, none more so than .308 Winchester. I would venture to say pretty easily that .308 Winchester, or its military designation 7.62 by 51mm NATO, is the most developed cartridge of all time. If you're going to go out and find a rifle manufacturer that has only made one rifle in one chambering, chances are it's .308 Winchester. And then you look at some of the military offerings. You have the M14, the AR-10, SR-25, the M24, M40, Dillon M134. These are all rifles that have proven themselves in combat over long periods of time, and 7.62 has worked out really well for those. By contrast, 6.5 Creedmoor, the newcomer, does not have anywhere near that kind of market saturation. It might not ever. We'll see how it goes. But it is growing extremely rapidly every day. We're seeing new bolt-action rifles, new semi-autos, including the M1A, which is kind of the civilian M14. We have lots of AR-10 variants, like the CMMG Mark III DTR2 that we tested earlier this year, and the market is just growing day by day. New ammo manufacturers, new barrels being cut, and we're going to see a lot more in the future. One of the biggest differences between 6.5 Creedmoor and .308 Winchester is bullet selection. .308 is the round to go to if you want to get special effects from your bullets. Now here's the original pattern right here, 150 grain full metal jacket. This is how this originally would have worked. Now this is using a slightly updated bullet. You can see right here, this is a boat tail bullet right here instead of a flat base like the original model would have had. And so this will be slicker. This is going to have a little bit of a better ogive overall too. So this will have better exterior ballistics. But then from there, everything just exploded. .308 Winchester has a multitude of bullets and bullet styles you can get. Since this is a military round from its earliest days, this is one where you're going to be able to get all kinds of very special effect rounds, like armor piercing, incendiary rounds, exploding things. This is one where you can get sabots, actually. So you can put very lightweight 224 diameter bullets inside and get very high velocities using this same cartridge right here. And you can just use your .308 barrel. Sometimes you can get really good accuracy, and usually, from what I've seen with some of the guys out at the range, they tend to get a flyer, but it's still a really neat effect. But you can see that some of the things that I've hand-loaded for myself, we have a great big 208 grain Hornady AMAX. This is a subsonic round right here using this gigantic slick bullet. This is one that you can easily load up for 300 Winchester Magnum. This would be a great choice. But in .308, it also performs very well. You get some of these. Okay, let's go on the lighter end. You can actually get down to 110, even down to 100 grain bullets. So overall, you get a massive range of bullet weights with .308. You can get all the way from 100 up to probably about 230 grain bullets. And I'm sure there are some that kind of spike things out on either end of the spectrum, but in general, you can get 100 to 230. That is a massive, massive range of weights. So starting here on the left, we have 150 grain full metal jacket bow tail. This is an SST from Hornady, 150 grain. 150 grain Speer Gold Dot. This is a new bullet that has just come out. It's a component only. I don't think they have ammunition for this yet, but I've been testing these out and these are excellent. Very slick, rebaited boat tail. This is one that should kind of blend the line between a match bullet and a hunting bullet. This is one that should be able to be very good for kind of longer range hunting. Down here we have a 168 grain version of the same thing. This is a 175 grain Federal Edge TLR. These bullets are very slick, and these are designed to go head to head with the Hornady ELD-X hunting bullets and maybe the Nosler Accubon. There are a whole bunch of, maybe the Sierra Game Changer. There are a bunch of very slick hunting bullets out there now as people are trying to stretch the distance where they can hunt. And this one's going to work out very well. I've been very pleased with how this shoots, and I'll do a full review on both of these. This one steps up to 200 grains. Then there's that 208 grain AMAX. Now over here, 6.5 Creedmoor, since it is relatively new, and though everybody in the States for the longest time has known that 6.5 bullets are very efficient, we really didn't have a cartridge that a lot of people would actually shoot. 260 was getting close. People were really interested in 260 Remington, but everybody just kind of talked about 6.5 by 55 out in Europe longingly, hoping that we could get something like that. And now we do a 6.5 Creedmoor. But we're still kind of new in the bullets over here on this side of the pond. So we don't have a whole lot to choose from. It is growing rapidly. But where we kind of started was with these sort of bullets right here, these match bullets. This is an open tip match that you see right here. This is a 140 grain bullet. And you can see right off the bat that these are very long and skinny compared to the 308s. And that is why these can be very ballistically efficient. Even though they're leaving the muzzle of the barrel at a lower velocity, these just don't want to stop. They want to keep on going. So over here we have kind of the original formula, open tip match. We have a pointed bullet, the ELD-M right here, or the ELD-X. These are going to be very, very slick, since they have that kind of pointed tip, longer overall, long boat tail. These are going to be very good for punching paper. ELD-X, great for hunting animals. But some of the things that we have kind of been looking for as people are starting to put more and more 6.5s into their collection for hunting, we really want a bullet that's going to perform very well. So there is the ELD-X, which is not bonded to the core. Some people have been kind of concerned about the core separating from the jacket. It doesn't seem to really affect performance. It still drops the animal dead. But hunters are still looking for something that they can ultimately rely on. The Speer Hot Core, this kind of gets into the same area. It is not bonded, but this is a rather inexpensive bullet, and it performs very well, I'm sure. This is one that has been well known in the market for a long time. But this one is not quite so slick through the air. It has a flat base. The ogive is not quite as pointed. So this one's not going to have quite the same trajectory as some of these match bullets right here. Blurring the lines again, here is the Speer Hot Core. This is a bonded bullet with a very sleek ogive and a rebaited boat tail. These have a high ballistic coefficient, 0.571 according to their figures. And in my own testing, these have shot very well out of the CMMG Mark III DTR2. This is a really neat bullet. I've released a review of what I think of these so far before I can actually go out and hunt with them, and you'll have to check that out. This story continues with ammunition. 308 Winchester has options in every possible configuration that you can imagine. You have very inexpensive ammo, like this sort of surplus ammo, this kind of military style. This is going to be very inexpensive, and it's actually going to work pretty well. And then you're going to have some ammos that get up into your higher price ranges, very special designations. So if you want some for hunting, you have hunting ammunition. If you want target ammo, you have things like the Federal Gold Medal Match. It's available everywhere, every store you want to go to, and it's just going to be everywhere you look. You can also get it in bulk at very inexpensive prices. We're talking about as low as 30 cents per round. On the 6.5 Creedmoor side, you are going to be dealing with fewer ammunition types. It's going to be growing by the day. For example, this right here is kind of a hybrid. This is one that should be able to work as a hunting and a target load, but for the most part, you're going to find target ammunition. Some of the others are going to be a bit more difficult to find. And I'll tell you this, if I mentioned that some of this, like the XM80C, some of this can come in as low as about 30 cents a round. The lowest you're going to get on 6.5 Creedmoor that I have seen lately has been about 70 cents a round. So expect to pay about $1 a round. And it's not because this is just more expensive. It's that in general, you only get high quality ammo with 6.5 Creedmoor. It's not so easy to find some of the kind of lower end FMJ type stuff, just because those bullets, for one thing, don't really exist, and there is no real military surplus kind of market like that. There is no Lake City 6.5 Creedmoor, for example. This story again continues when you get into reloading. All of the parts, all of the equipment, all of the knowledge base has been going into 308 Winchester for a very, very long time. You can get inexpensive components like these bulk bullets that you see here in this box. It's easy to get just a whole bunch of FMJs if you want to load those up. And these actually shoot about half MOA for me. These my own hand loads. These are quite good. You can get brass very inexpensively, like 7.62 by 51 millimeter brass. You can get die sets from everybody in all kinds of flavors. They have some that are designed for very specific purposes. And actually, when it comes to some of these components, you can get some very kind of strange ones. Like, for example, you can get Palma brass for 308 that actually has a small rifle primer pocket, which supposedly lends itself to better consistency, better accuracy overall. Once every couple of years you can find that stuff, and it's very highly sought after, but it still is out there. Kind of interesting. On the 6.5 Creedmoor side, we're getting more and more every day, but there are still lots of absences in the market. There are not that many people making brass. Again, that number is growing by the day. Projectiles growing by the day. Reloading equipment growing by the day, but it still has nowhere near the market penetration of 308. With all this in mind, it seems like 308 has thrown a knockout punch. 6.5 Creedmoor can't possibly compete. And no, the reason why people are going with 6.5 Creedmoor is right in front of you. It has to do with trajectory. These smaller, slicker bullets just do not want to slow down. These are going to leave the muzzle considerably slower than a relative 308. Capacity on this case is quite a bit higher on the 308 side. So you can get those bullets, a comparable bullet weight, leaving the muzzle considerably faster. However, as you can see in our little chart that we have right here, where I'm trying to compare apples to apples, you can compare different trajectories if you want. But what I've done is I've compared a 140 grain Hornady ELDM, this is factory ammunition using their data, versus a 178 grain Hornady ELDX right here. These should have a pretty similarly slick bullet. They should be in the sweet spot for what the cartridge can do. If you go with a lighter bullet, it'll be quicker out of the gate, but it'll slow down a lot faster. If you have one of the heavier bullets, it'll just come out of the muzzle a lot slower and you might not get the best trajectory. For 308, it seems like 168s to 175s are kind of going to be the sweet spot. So I've compared these two. The trajectory that you see right here is just drop. Okay, so this just shows the difference in how much drop you're going to get out at 1,800 yards. And you can see that it's not huge, but it is considerable. It is noticeable. And that right there could spell the difference between hitting your target and missing it. So let's take a look at the data right here. We're going to get into windage, which is one of the most important things if you are going to be shooting at any kind of longer distance. Wind is the number one obstacle. Distance, not really so much. So right here, I've gone ahead and I've put these charts out to 1,800 yards. So that's just a little bit more than a mile. And let's see first off where these actually hit the sound barrier, where they hit the transonic barrier and start going subsonic. With this 6.5 Creedmoor load, we are getting out just past 1,500 yards, probably about 1,525. These things are still really hauling out there. By contrast, 308, these are going subsonic a bit past 1,250 yards. Now, here's something that's kind of interesting about this. Even though it is moving slower and it's going subsonic for a good bit longer than the 6.5 Creedmoor, as far as energy goes, this is one of the talking points that I think folks might be off a little bit on. You're not going to get quite as much energy through this whole band with 6.5 Creedmoor as you will with 308. Let's back up to 1,000 yards and make a more reasonable comparison. At 1,000 yards, the 308 is moving out at 1,352 feet per second. Over here, on 6.5 Creedmoor, at the same distance, 1,517 feet per second. The energy is extremely close, 715 pound-feet of energy at that point, and then 308, 723. So we're looking at a minuscule difference in energy at that point. And that might be one of those great reasons why people are choosing 6.5 Creedmoor over 308. If you can put down pretty much the same amount of energy with that much reduced recoil, then that's definitely worth taking a look at. And let's take a look at some of the specs when it comes to actually getting on target. One of the big reasons why people choose 6.5 Creedmoor is that it's just a little bit easier to make your hits because you're dealing with less wind and you're dealing with less drop overall. So here at 1,000 yards, we're looking at 8.67 milliradians of drop versus the 10.11 with 308. Now, wind drift is really the big deal for me. Drop is nice, but when it comes to wind drift, we're looking at 1.85 for 6.5 Creedmoor, and then over here on 308, 2.25. And that's a pretty big deal. It's not a gigantic spread. It could be much more extreme, but I'll take this big a spread right here. This is going to help out every little bit when I'm trying to make a shot at the longer distances, especially if I'm shooting at smaller targets. On that hog shoot, I'm sure that I could have done it at 400 yards using 308, but 6.5 Creedmoor I think made that shot really possible. These charts are a good estimate. They should be relatively accurate, but there is one issue, one X factor that we can't really account for in any of our calculations, and that's going to be how these bullets perform once they hit that transonic barrier. Some of these bullets are going to go unstable, they're going to tumble, and they may just start flying all over the place, missing the target. Some people discount this and think that it's not an issue, and it really is. Out in F-class matches, every so often we would hear some bullets going overhead that sounded like just little mini helicopters or a swarm of bees or something, and that was those bullets becoming unstable at whatever distance it was. Usually it was a 308, and usually it was a very, very short barrel that I guess just didn't get enough twist on these bullets. I think in this case, any of these should be okay as long as we have a 1 in 10 twist on 308 and we have a 1 in 8 twist on 6.5 Creedmoor. I think that these should be fine. Denver, one of the guys that we shoot with, he has shot some of the heavier, like 178, 175 grain ELD bullets out at some of the longer ranges where he has definitely hit the transonic barrier, and they seem to go through there just fine. It didn't lose any kind of stability. Also on the 6.5 Creedmoor side, since we have already shot some of these bullets at a mile, and these were actually subsonic for over 400 yards, we didn't have any stability issues there. These were able to make pretty consistent hits, or at least very consistent close misses. Now this might not be the case for some of the bullets that you choose. Again, get the correct twist rate for the bullets that you're going to be using at whatever practical distances you're going to have. But then I can vouch at least for the BTHP match bullets from Hornady and the ELD-X, I believe. No, it was ELD-M for 308 Winchester. Both of those cruise through just fine. Let's make one more quick comparison. 6.5 Creedmoor and 308 Winchester both are relatively stable over long distances, but neither have what you would really consider to be a very flat trajectory in the near range. And that's why you may take a close look at this guy right here, 243 Winchester. These bullets are moving out extremely quickly. Some of these new bullets have very, very slick ballistic coefficients. So these in the kind of near range, maybe within 1,000 yards, these are going to outperform the other two. They're going to be very, very flat shooting. They're going to buck the wind extremely well, and it may be one that you look at in your project rifle. The 12FV that we're using for this project does not currently come in 243 Winchester. It used to, but they just don't do that one anymore. But if you are choosing a different donor rifle for your project, you may take a close look at this. Now that we've talked about ammunition, parts, trajectories, and some of the other theory, when the rubber meets the road, what's the real world performance? What is the difference between these? 6.5 Creedmoor is touted as producing less recoil than .308, and in general, I would say that is exactly true. Some of this is going to come down to what projectile you choose, since you can actually get up into those, 200 grain plus, maybe 230 grain bullets with .308, and you're going to max out a bit below probably 150 grains with 6.5 Creedmoor. Yeah, you're going to get less recoil overall. It's more than 243, less than .308, and I think that recoil difference is worth it, especially for some of the younger shooters, or maybe more importantly, if you need to be able to get back on target really quickly. It's just not going to shove the gun off, either muzzle flip or maybe tracking in a different direction. It's just not going to get off target very well. You can get right back on and maybe see your impact or take that follow-up shot. Next up, we have the terminal effects of the bullets themselves. And a lot of this, again, is just going to come down to bullet. So far, we've been seeing lots of these match bullets that are not designed for terminal performance in 6.5 Creedmoor. Of course, .308, you can get anything and everything. If there has been a bullet developed, it has been run in .308. On this side, we're getting new bullets every day, and they're getting better and better. And as you can see, we do have an array of bullets to choose from. However, even with this target bullet that is not designed for terminal performance, in my own testing, it has worked out very well. This is a long bullet, which is going to lend itself well to tumbling. And it seems like this actually did that quite well, especially when I took out that hog earlier this year. Now, next up, we have feeding and extraction. I would say that both are perfectly smooth. One of the things that you can run into when you develop a new cartridge, especially when you're dealing with semi-autos, sometimes you can have feed issues based on the length of the neck or the angle of the shoulder. Like, for example, some of the WSSMs that died out a few years back, those had some issues, especially in semi-autos where they had difficulty feeding. 6.5 Creedmoor feeds very slickly. Hornady did their homework, works great. Now, as far as barrel life goes, you are going to see less barrel life with your 6.5 Creedmoor just because you're putting a similar powder charge through a smaller hole. That's just the way it goes. However, it might not be significant enough that you're really going to care. Are you going to put 1 billion rounds through your rifle? With the neck length and the shoulder angle on this, according to one of the interviews that we all saw a little earlier with Mr. Krieger from Krieger Barrels, he was saying that this kind of setup is going to extend your barrel life compared to, say, a 243, which has a little bit of a shallower shoulder and a shorter neck. It seems like some of the powder coming through can kind of erode the throat, and this one won't do so badly. I really think that, especially if you're going to be running a bolt gun, I don't think you're really going to notice because you're not going to be putting down that kind of volume of fire. If it's a semi-auto, yeah, you might have to swap a barrel at some point. In the final analysis, when would you choose one cartridge over the other? We'll start with the obvious with 6.5 Creedmoor. You have that superior trajectory. If you're dealing with wind, if you're dealing with smaller targets, if you're dealing with moving targets, you're just going to increase your probability of making a hit as distances increase. Yes, the bullet is moving a little bit slower out of the muzzle compared to .308, but it just does not want to slow down. It is so slick. For recoil reduction, yeah, you're going to want to go in this direction. You're going to have a little bit of a variety of bullet weights that you can use, but overall, this is going to provide less of a punch at the shooter's end, and that's going to mean that you can get on target a little bit more quickly. One of the other great reasons to go with this is that you can run your VLD bullets, like these really slick ones that you see right here, in your factory magazines. And you don't have to push those bullets really far back into the case. These are set up originally from the factory to be able to run these really slick bullets and to do it in all the hardware that you may already have. This has a growing market. It's not as big as 308, but it is getting bigger every day, and that's one reason to think about it, especially as we get military adoption. Compatibility with 308 goodies, that's another great reason to go 6.5 Creedmoor. Basically anything that you can run on 308, whether it's your silencers, your muzzle brakes, that kind of thing, you can probably screw it onto the end of your barrel. Magazines, all that sort of stuff, it's all going to be compatible with 6.5 Creedmoor, and you don't need to make changes in order to make them adapt. Now, if you do go with 6.5 Creedmoor, I recommend that you go with the 1-in-8 twist unless you have a really good reason not to. That means that you can stabilize your big bullets like these, the 140 grains, 143, 147, and you're going to be able to make those impacts out at longer distance. Why might you want to choose 308 instead of 6.5 Creedmoor? There are actually a bunch of really good reasons. And the biggest one is going to be just how ubiquitous 308 is. We have guns, parts, accessories, magazines, bullets, powders, all kinds of things that are tuned, tweaked, honed to make 308 a really effective cartridge. If someone releases a new bullet type, chances are it's going to be 308. We have much less on the 6.5 Creedmoor side. Not that many bullets, not that many cases, just we're waiting for things to kind of ramp up, and they are, but they are nowhere near this. And here's one of the bigger resources that you can tap into, and that is the knowledge base out there. There is so much information about 308 in your reloading manuals online. If you want to know something about 308, it's out there. Somebody has done it. You want to run sabos, somebody's going to tell you how to do it. If you want to figure out if X bullet works with Y powder in Z case, somebody out there has the data and you're going to figure it out. It's like doing these subsonics right here for 308. That actually was very easy to do. I could just look it up and see what other people had done. And yeah, there's the result right there. Another great reason to go with 308 is that you're going to get slightly increased energy on the target, depending on the bullet, especially within some of those closer ranges, because you are dealing with a heavier bullet, and maybe it's not going to be moving quite as fast out there at the longer ranges, but especially a little closer in, yeah, you are going to get more energy on target. So hunters that are especially in brush or some of the closer country and forests, I think that you're going to really enjoy 308. It's going to perform very well for you. Related to that, you should really check out Iraq Veteran 8888's video where they tested heavy bullets moving slowly versus light bullets moving quickly through brush. So if you hit something kind of in between you and your target, like you're trying to shoot through grass or maybe brush in the forest, how much are your bullets going to deviate? It turns out that heavy and slow is actually better, at least in the testing that they did. And it was actually quite a compelling case that they made. So if you are shooting maybe some 200 grain plus bullets in 308, you're probably going to be knocked off course a lot less than if you're shooting a 140 in 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, if you do buy a 308, I recommend that you get a 1-in-10 twist. That means that you can stabilize some of those bigger, heavier bullets. There are twist rates all over the map for specific bullet types. But again, if you want to have that flexibility where you can shoot lighter bullets or heavier, go with 1-in-10 unless you have a great reason not to. If you'd like to chip in $1 or $2 a month to keep these videos coming, check out my link to Patreon down below. Our patrons of the Destructive Arts keep the lights on, provide some of the gear that we use for testing, and a special thanks to Peter and Sportsman's Guide at the 300 Win Mag and 338 Lapua Magnum levels. Make sure that you subscribe, share, hit the notification bell. We have lots coming up. We're going to be working with this rifle right here to test this rifle eventually out at a mile. You're not going to want to miss that. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Even if you didn't like this particular content, go ahead and subscribe. There's probably something coming that's more up your alley. Check out this playlist right here. This is going to have videos in a similar vein to what you just watched. These two videos we cherry-picked for you. And finally, The Social Regressive is on Patreon. So you can become a patron of the Destructive Arts and earn some goodies while helping us to provide high-quality videos just by kicking us a few bucks a month. Thanks so much for your patronage.